Well, I'm back from my trip, but sadly, Dusty, sad face, was not adopted while I was gone. So, in more positive news, he's back with me. Um, so, welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly-ish chatty catch-up on things that I've read. I am not currently wrapping up everything because I'm reading a whole lot, and I did just have some travel. So, at least part of that, I'm really terrible at vlogging or filming while I'm with people. So I got enough, I think, pictures and video clips to make somewhat of a travel vlog for mid-month book bash weekend, at least, to share with you. So that will be upcoming here. And I also used one of my secret reading projects as my reading for that weekend because I knew the books were going to be kind of easy reads, short, and they fit really well with being traveling. So anyway, onward. We're not going to talk about those today. We're going to talk about the random stuff that I'm not going to fit in to any of my projects that I'm working on. So random books for this week's check-in. Let's start, I think, with the one I liked the least, which was Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter. I went in thinking this was much more toward thriller horror, and I don't think it's really that. It's much more in the vein, I would say, with We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Verbotes. That one and this book are much more like unsettling contemporary fiction than actually pushing into thriller or horror. They're both very strong commentaries on capitalism and toxic workplace culture, how that changes people, I think. So they really do mesh well together, I think, the two of them. Though We Had to Remove This Post, I also didn't really love. I think I liked more than this one because it was actually doing a lot of things, whereas this one felt very surface level and expected in every way. We're following this character, Cass, as she is dealing with overwhelming new job at a Silicon Valley tech company, a very big name that's got a lot of status and clout for her, but she's at the bottom rung. Nobody treats her well there, and it is just generally a very nasty workplace where everyone expects her to work excessively. There's just no respect for her in general, and she doesn't have a lot of hope in terms of what she can do. Every time she sees sort of some glimpse of light at the end of the tunnel, it clearly gets squashed down because of just general capitalism. There are a lot of scene dressing, I would say, about the setting, both at the workplace and the area around her, because she seems to be in, Silicon Valley, so we know we have both wealth and immense poverty clashing right up against each other. And so there's a lot of that, but it's never really delved into in any significant way. And Cassie's also dealing with trying to have a personal life and not really being able to function in her personal life because of her work life and the difficulties that it creates. She's using a lot of drugs to deal with that. She's in a very toxic romantic relationship, and she also has missed her period. So there is this whole, is she pregnant, and what should she do about that if she is? So I assume that's the nod to Ripe, is primarily discussing that topic. But we also have that lack of respect for her body health and womanhood, really, within the workplace, butting up against that more personal aspect of her life. And just the fact that workplace culture doesn't really respect pregnancy for women. And so there's also kind of a speculative element to this, but I really just wanted to throw it out the window because I actually liked the writing of the parts that were kind of speculative. And right from the beginning, that speculative element is that Cassie has a black hole that follows her around. And some of those sections were just so beautifully written and really conceptual. They almost reminded me of, like, This Is How You Lose the Time War, in that very conceptual, abstract way. And so I wanted to like those more than I did. But the book didn't really do anything with that, and I never understood the point of it, for the most part. So it didn't really go anywhere. And the whole book didn't really go anywhere. As I said, I felt like everything about the story was very, very predictable. The main plot is sort of this workplace ramping up into, I think it's in the blurb, illegal activities, corporate espionage, that kind of thing. And that's the most compelling thing about this, and you already know that from the blurb. And there just wasn't enough below surface level, nuanced commentary that was fresh about the story to really pull me in. And then the book just sort of ends, much like we had to remove this post. There wasn't a conclusion. It wasn't even a matter of leaving it open-ended for possible interpretations. It just stops. So there wasn't really an ending at all for us to interpret, as far as I'm concerned. So I just really didn't love this at all. It was a big disappointment because I was expecting it to be much more of a critique and commentary on late stage capitalism, and that was present, but it was so surface level. So anyway, total dud. Moving on. I next read a memoir, or next in terms of how much I liked them, was The House of Hidden Meanings by RuPaul Charles. And I should have known going in, this memoir is very short. It's only like 7 hours on audio, and I did listen to it on audio, mostly while driving long distances in my travels. And it was perfect for that. It was very engaging and easy to listen to, and it's obviously narrated by RuPaul himself. And RuPaul is, of course, the founder, creator, innovator of Drag Race, and just such an icon throughout the world, I think. But this wasn't what I expected, because it is so short. There isn't room for RuPaul's wonderful and incredibly varied story. It was a very, very small slice of his story. Mainly we're talking about growing up through the very beginning of adulthood. So it really didn't even get into Drag Race at all. It was just up to the beginnings of a drag career, even just starting. So mainly this was focused on family life and the difficulties of figuring himself out as a queer and gay person, the beginnings of the drag scene in his early life, and being part of that when it was just much, much more stigmatized than it even is now. And it also had kind of the salacious elements that you would expect. It was, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and drag, but there were so many harder elements about being exploited in relationships and having really hard familial relationships because of who he was, the complex relationship he had with his mother growing up, where, her love for him was immense, and she seems to have always accepted him, but was very, very hard on him as well, and was dealing with her own issues throughout his upbringing. And so I just felt like this was a really complex, nuanced memoir that had a lot more depth than I was expecting, and a lot more serious content than I was expecting. So I did enjoy it very much, but it also wasn't kind of the fun, upbeat drag memoir about Drag Race that I was looking for going in. So it didn't meet expectations, but I did think it was a great memoir. And finally, I read God of the Woods by Liz Moore. It's kind of a new release, bestseller thriller. It's been all over the place on BookTube. But this was still a big surprise to me, both because I enjoyed it very much. I thought I probably would, but I was surprised that I read it in the first place. I was not planning to get to this anytime soon whatsoever, but I was sort of press-ganged by a friend into an in-person book club, and this was the selection for the month. So I read it over the course of a couple of days. It was unputdownable, absolutely. So the thriller element totally worked on me. Once I got into it, it is so well structured in order to pull you in, I think, at least for myself and for the people I was reading with, that I just was so sucked into it. And that's because it successfully manages to have a massive amount of short chapters, changing characters and multiple timelines, and doing so in a way that actually worked, didn't lose anybody in the reading group, and just really delivered on building that tension. So in this story, it is a historical thriller that's running from sometime in the 50s to 1975, but most of the book is taking place in 1975. And in 1975, we are at this summer camp on a wealthy family's, the Van Laar's, preserve land. And while there, one of that family's children is lost at the summer camp. And so this is following the investigation of the disappearance of Barbara Van Laar, the child of this family. And also the fact that years before, prior to Barbara's birth, the same family lost a son. He disappeared and never came back as a child. And so there's all this concern of, is there a linkage there? There are urban legends surrounding this place that play into it. So there's a lot of like eerie elements, or is it something more nefarious going on within the family? Is it someone at the camp? Did she get into something that she shouldn't have as this teenage girl? There are just so many layers to what it's exploring at that sort of surface level. But beyond that, the story is tackling so much more in terms of, I would say the biggest theme is feminist and regarding sexism toward women during the time, about gender roles and the limitations on women. And we have a really, really strong and really varied cast of women. We see women who are going through feeling different and not fitting into society and gender roles. We have women who have completely adhered to gender roles and are suffering for it. So we have a really great representation there of the time, I think. We also have an excellent exploration of class disparity because we have this standard summer camp and we have a very wealthy family, and the juxtaposition of the two and things happening in both at the same time are just really well placed. So it's things like that throughout that I think were explored in such a really engaging way for the reader, and telling us something more without shoving it in our faces, really, making it part of the plot that we're hearing about this. One of the best characters that I enjoyed so much is a first woman cop. And so we're following her as she's dealing with sexism and harassment in her job and just trying to do this investigation in the best way she can, because it's kind of the first really big case she's been involved in. And I thought that was so well handled and just so fantastic. Throughout, she reminded me immensely of another first woman police officer character from the movie Wicked Little Letters that I watched a couple months ago, I think. And very, very similar characters, very similar amount of care and concern for the situation and what's right over just following procedure. And so I was totally attached to her character throughout. She was absolutely my favorite. So I really, really enjoyed this. I was, as I said, very surprised. I was kind of expecting generic thriller from everything that I'd heard, though most people do seem to have enjoyed it. But yeah, it really, really gripped me through the entire reading experience. I think I read it probably in less than 48 hours. So highly recommend this one if you're looking for a thriller that you kind of can't put down. And then my ongoing reading, I have multiple things coming up that I've already actually wrapped up. So as I said, I've got that vlog for Mid-Month Book Bash coming up, hopefully this week. I've got a recent reads of Cozy Mysteries that I completed earlier this month. Ongoing, I've got multiple sequels or series finishers that I'm trying to finish. And I've got some sure things that I think will be 5 stars that I'm vlogging. So that will be hopefully completed by the end of the month, I think. So my voracious reading continues. I've also watched a few things that I want to mention. So first, we'll do just the very quickest one, Heartstopper. Of course, the new season came out. I've not read any of Heartstopper. I really need to do that because I continue to love the show. This newest season was tackling some even more dark and difficult topics, and yet there's so much heart and joy throughout this series. They managed to handle these difficult things with such care and make it just so hopeful. I don't know how they manage that every single season. So this is a series, if you somehow don't know, on Netflix about 2 teenage boys, one of whom is out and gay and kind of being bullied about it initially. And then he is befriended by someone on the rugby team, and they end up falling in love with each other and become just the most beautiful, healthy couple. And everything about this handles a lot of difficult scenarios with such maturity and kind of models how to have those conversations in a healthy way while still being a real teenager. So I think it's great for teens to see and be exposed to those healthy conversations about really difficult things that they would be going through kind of in a coming of age story. So I watched that while I was traveling. That was my late night, I can't do anything. And I don't know how I managed to watch the entirety of it during that time, but I did somehow. Then I actually went to the theater with some of my family to go see The Wild Robot. and I loved it so much. I have actually read both books. I think there are only 2 books. There might be more now. I have not checked, but regardless, this is based on the first book, The Wild Robot, which I have read and enjoyed. And the art style is stellar and very much follows the art style of the book, so it's a great depiction. It is such a wonderful, heartwarming story of a robot who it crash lands basically on an island and doesn't know what to do, doesn't have a mission or a customer to serve, and so starts making connections with the local wildlife on the island. And very quickly begins to care for a baby bird. And that baby bird and the wild robot have just this beautiful, beautiful relationship. It's like a child-mother relationship. And Roz, the wild robot, comes to build emotions and really care for everyone around her. And it's very much about community building, really, really strongly. So I thought it was just beautifully done, and I, like, 5 stars, heartily recommend everybody go see The Wild Robot. It was so good. And then lastly, I should have started with this one because it was a total dud. Last night, I watched Suspiria on Prime. And I had wanted to watch this for the longest time. It's a horror movie, and like a horror movie with like music and dancing being very prominent to it, I was like, oh, this might be good. I think this is a remake of an older film, if I recall. But I hated it. It was just so strange. And it's kind of trying to be arty, clearly, but it was really a lot of just witches dancing very naked, like surreal and abstract, and it didn't work for me at all. Yeah, not my sort of thing. I don't feel it had much to say. Dakota Johnson is the star, and that probably should have told me, because she both can't really act very well and can't dance very well. And it was just so bizarre, and so much time spent on absolutely nothing. Yeah, so I really didn't like Suspiria. So I think that is all for me today. I've rambled on with way too much for now. So I think I will leave you there for this weekend. But as I said, I have a couple of upcoming videos that are wrapping up other books that I have been reading as well in groups, and you will see those in the next several days. So whenever I feel like editing. So I think that's all for me today. I hope you've had a wonderful reading week, and thank you so very much for watching.